We're talking about government shutdowns. But, we're not really interested in the legislative drama itself.
No.
We want to focus on the cold, hard financial consequences, the ones that strike way outside the Capitol Beltway.
It's often framed as just a political squabble, right? A fight over funding.
Yeah.
But for millions of Americans, a shutdown is an immediate economic injury.
Right.
And those financial shockwaves, they don't just hit D.C., they hit the very core of the U.S. economy.
Which is the small business sector.
Exactly. It's small business sector.
We should be clear about the scale here. When we talk about this sector, we are talking about the engine of growth.
Absolutely.
Our analysis shows small businesses, there are over 33 million firms. They generate, roughly 2/3 of all net new jobs.
That's right. This is the very sector that policymakers always say they're relying on for economic resilience, yet it's just uniquely exposed. It's so fragile when that political stability disappears.
And that fragility, I think that's what we really need to illuminate today.
Yeah.
Our mission is to get past the headlines and really unpack the specific mechanics of the damage. From frozen contractor payments to suspended loans.
And then we'll get into the practical, essential recovery and mitigation strategies, the things needed to shield this vital economic engine.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the most immediate thing. That severe financial shock. The one felt by businesses that rely on the federal government as a client.
The blow is instantaneous, and it's measurable, especially for federal contractors.
Right.
The most critical issue isn't some, long-term contract dispute. It's much simpler. The payments just stop.
The cash flow just dries up.
Completely. These firms run on reliable accounts receivable, and then suddenly those reliable payments, they turn into financial deadweight on the balance sheet, just like that.
How widespread is that problem when a shutdown actually hits? Are we just talking about a few late invoices here and there?
Oh, it's far, far worse than that. If you look at the 2018-2019 event, the scale was just shocking.
Okay.
During that shutdown, one estimate showed that over 90% of federal contractor invoices went unpaid for the entire duration.
90%.
For a small firm with already thin margins, that creates an acute cash flow crisis instantly. It forces thousands to scramble just to meet payroll.
And beyond the payment freeze, you have the operational paralysis. You're actually forced to stop working.
Exactly. The agencies, they issue these formal stop work orders.
Right.
So the business stops generating billable revenue, and then it faces this terrible choice. Do you keep your specialized, highly skilled staff, paying them out of reserves you don't have?
Or do you risk losing that talent forever to a stable job in the private sector?
That's the choice.
And when we talk about stopping work, are we talking about small IT contracts, or does this paralysis hit some of the really big league projects that rely on small firm innovation?
It hits everything. The data shows major players like the Department of Defense, the DoD, and NASA, they halted, awarding all non-essential contracts. That stalled critical high-tech logistics and defense projects, all of which relied heavily on that small firm innovation and specialization. The whole supply chain just locks up.
Okay, now let's shift to firms that might need capital, even if they don't have a federal contract.
Yeah.
The moment the government shutters, it seems like it immediately severs that lifeline provided by the Small Business Administration, the SBA.
This is so critical because the SBA's loan programs, specifically the 7A and the 504 loan guarantee programs, they are the backbone of capital access for so many businesses looking to expand.
And they just stop.
They're instantly suspended. When the SBA can't process the guarantees, the banks won't issue the loans. It's that simple.
So basically, a small company could have its entire growth plan for the year just killed, wiped out by a legislative fight happening 2,000 miles away.
That's it.
What's the scale of that freeze?
Well, we saw very clear evidence during that 2018-2019 event. The SBA stopped processing all new loan applications.
All of them.
And this was estimated to have frozen approximately $2 billion in small business financing per week.
Per week. Wow.
Just think about the ripple effect of that lost capital across construction, manufacturing, retail expansion. It's huge.
And that's not even counting disaster recovery.
No. Any business trying to recover from a natural disaster found their economic injury disaster loan, the EADL applications, they were instantly frozen too, just delaying their efforts to rebuild.
It really is like an involuntary stop sign for entire regulated industries.
Yeah.
I remember hearing about the small craft breweries that were just paralyzed?
That's a perfect illustration of this regulatory paralysis. If you're a brewery and you're waiting for a new permit from the TTB, that's the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau,
They're not there to sign off?
they stopped signing off on permits, on labels. It meant that business owners who had already brewed the product couldn't legally put a label on the bottle.
Turning inventory into wasted capital.
Wasted capital. The TTB's closure created this huge backlog, and it delayed the opening and sales for so many new wineries and distilleries.
Which moves us into the secondary economic impact, right?
Yeah.
The invisible ripple effect that hits every main street, even if you're not selling directly to NASA.
And the biggest secondary hit is what we can call the furlough effect on consumer demand.
Okay.
When federal workers and those non-essential contractors stop getting paid, that translates into billions of dollars in spending power just vanishing from local economies instantly.
And the numbers there are staggering. That 35-day shutdown, it resulted in about 800,000 federal workers missing 2 full paychecks.
And it's full paychecks.
That is a financial hole that immediately impacts local coffee shops, dry cleaners, restaurants.
Precisely. Small restaurants and shops near federal hubs, especially in the D.C. area or, say, near National Park Service sites, they reported absolutely devastating revenue declines.
Not bad.
In some cases, 50% or more. Their entire customer base just disappeared overnight. And sometimes that forced those businesses into temporary closures themselves.
And that pain, that financial pain, it has to travel up the lending chain. It creates this major market uncertainty that affects every single business owner who might be seeking funding.
That's exactly right. When banks see their local customers struggling to pay rent or staff, they become much more hesitant to underwrite new commercial loans.
They get nervous.
Very nervous. They fear the shutdown might signal a prolonged economic downturn. Anecdotal evidence from 2019 showed that some community banks actually placed temporary moratoriums on all new small business lending until the whole appropriations fight was resolved.
So when lending freezes, growth just stalls.
Oh.
And high-growth firms like emerging tech and biotech, they suffer too because the SEC, being understaffed or closed, it can't process a lot of their public filings.
Which delays crucial capital raises.
Right.
And on top of all that, we start flying blind. Businesses rely on timely federal data for their strategy, and during a shutdown, the data stops flowing.
What kind of data are we talking about?
The reports from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS, and the Census Bureau. That means owners lose key indicators, housing starts, retail sales, GDP components. They're forced to make these crucial decisions about expansion or contraction without any reliable, up-to-date information.
And they lose their support structure. You know, the networks that provide free, often vital technical assistance.
Yes, like the Small Business Development Centers, SBDCs, and the volunteer-based SCORE mentorship program. They often lose funding or access, cutting off help right when these struggling firms need it the most.
So if you connect that financial freeze to the human level, that's when you start to really appreciate the cost beyond just the ledger.
Exactly. The psychological and operational strain of this sudden uncertainty, it's immense, and it really determines a company's long-term viability.
You see it in the brain drain, for example. Skilled, specialized employees, they're faced with prolonged unpaid leave or layoff risk.
And they naturally leave. They go find stable work in the private sector.
And replacing that talent, that institutional knowledge later, it's incredibly expensive.
And we also see owners being forced into these heartbreaking personal finance decisions just to navigate the crisis.
What do you mean?
I mean, it's painful to even talk about, but we know that in 2019, many small business owners who depended on federal contracts, they revealed they had liquidated personal retirement accounts.
Wow.
Or they took out expensive home equity loans simply to cover their company's payroll and keep the lights on.
So they're mortgaging their own future to save their company. That is an unbelievable burden to bear for the price of political gridlock.
It is.
And if they can't fulfill their contracts because of stop work orders, they risk long-term damage to their reputation.
And potentially losing goodwill, being excluded from future federal partnership opportunities. The non-financial cost is really this erosion of trust, this destruction of personal financial stability for the people who are essentially acting as federal vendors.
Okay, that brings us to our final and maybe the most crucial segment. How do you recover? And maybe more importantly, how do you future-proof against an event that is fundamentally unpredictable? Here's where it gets really interesting. The essential strategies for triage and for mitigation.
Well, triage has to start with hyper-detailed financial control. A small business needs to create a 90-day cash flow plan. A survival budget.
Okay.
And every single expense has to be ruthlessly categorized. Is it mission critical, negotiable, or great? Can it be eliminated? The goal is to stretch whatever cash reserves you have as far as they can possibly go.
And you have to be aggressive with your external partners, right? Don't wait for your commercial lenders to call you.
Absolutely not. Proactively contact them. Request short-term principal forbearance or maybe interest-only payments. We saw in 2019 that a lot of banks were willing to offer these options.
But she had to ask.
But the business had to be aggressive in requesting those terms. Also, you should explore local bridge loan options, particularly from community development financial institutions or CDFIs.
Why them specifically?
Because they're local lenders. Their focus is on economic development and serving underserved communities. They often have quick access disaster funding options available.
So once the government is back open, what's the very first thing a contractor has to do? I'm assuming it's not just picking up where you left off.
No, the absolute priority is to contact your contracting officer, the CO. That's the federal rep managing the contract.
And what do you need from them?
You need a written resumption order, and you need it before you resume any work. Without that written order, you risk performing work that won't be paid for.
And documentation must be everything during that recovery phase.
Yeah.
Why is tracking every single incurred cost so critical during a shutdown?
Because if the government decides to formally cancel the stopped work, you may need to file claims for something called termination for convenience.
Right.
It's a clause that lets the government cancel the work, but it also allows contractors to recoup certain sunk costs if and only if they have impeccable documentation of all expenses.
From retention pay to idle equipment costs, everything.
Everything.
Okay. For the long-term shield, our sources all seem to emphasize structural change. And the fundamental goal seems to be diversification. Is capping federal reliance at, say, 60 or 70% really achievable for firms that were built just to serve the government?
It's exceptionally difficult, no question, but it's necessary. These businesses have to actively pursue contracts with state and local governments or with the private sector to dilute that risk.
So you have to build a strategy for it.
You have to create a dedicated strategy to reduce that dependency. Capping federal revenue at 60 to 70% of your total revenue should be the goal.
And financially, we hear all the time about an emergency fund, but this sounds like it has to be a shutdown-specific reserve, right?
Absolutely. This requires strict financial discipline. Building a dedicated cash reserve that's equal to 3 to 6 months of your operational expenses.
And that's untouchable for anything else.
Strictly for maintaining payroll and core utilities during a non-economic disruption, like a political shutdown.
And finally, we have to talk about advocating for systemic change. This idea of the wall-off principle.
This is the long-term solution. Businesses have to leverage their collective voice to push for legislation that grants accepted status to critical non-political economic functions.
So you're talking about structurally insulating specific functions from the political fight itself.
Exactly.
Specifically, things like shielding SBA loan guarantee processing.
And the payment of existing obligated federal contractors.
But how do you actually get something like that through Congress? I mean, that sounds tough.
It's challenging. It requires treating the continuity of SBA lending and contractor payments not as minor administrative costs, but as what they are: essential national economic stability measures.
So the advocacy has to be clear.
Very clear. The cost of shutting down these specific economic functions far outweighs any temporary political leverage gained by holding them hostage. They have to be walled off permanently.
You know, the 35-day shutdown of 2018-2019 really provided undeniable proof. The small business community bears a disproportionate burden of this political gridlock.
It does.
And their recovery really depends on aggressive, detailed triage and long-term structural preparedness.
The core lesson here is that political risk translates instantly and brutally into financial risk for the very people who fuel the economy.
So since diversification and a healthy cash reserve are such vital tools, maybe consider this. What percentage of your own business, or even your personal finances, is inadvertently tied to the stability of the federal government? And what's one action you could take this week to lower that dependency and build your own shutdown-proof plan?
A fascinating challenge to consider. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
We'll see you next time.
Software companies can fund their growth with accounts receivable factoring. Contact Chris at Versant Funding to learn if your software client is a factoring fit.
You know, when the headlines start warning about a government shutdown, a lapse in federal appropriations, most of us, I think, we view it as political theater.
Exactly.
It sounds so abstract, like a fight that's just contained within Washington, D.C.
Right.
But if you actually dig into the data, the financial damage it's not abstract at all. It's immediate, it's intense, and it strikes right at the economic engine of the country.
And that's the crucial misunderstanding, isn't it? This political paralysis doesn't just halt some bureaucratic process, it smashes directly into the small business ecosystem.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about over 33 million firms. These are the businesses generating 2/3 of all net new jobs in the U.S.
So this is a vital sector.
It's vital, but it's also uniquely exposed, you know? It's fragile when that federal spigot just turns off.
And that's our mission for today. We want to go beyond the politics and really explore the mechanics of the damage, the direct hits, the cascading ripple effects.
And most importantly, the strategies.
The practical recovery and mitigation strategies that small businesses have to adopt to survive this instability. We're going to unpack why these events create such disproportionate negative effects on the very foundation of American growth.
Okay, so let's start at ground zero.
Right, the immediate financial shock for those businesses that are directly linked to the federal government. So if you're a small federal contractor, the moment a shutdown is triggered, the first and most critical blow is cash flow.
It's instant, it's severe, and for liquidity, it's catastrophic.
Yeah.
Your accounts receivable, that money you earned, you invoiced last month, it suddenly turns into dead weight.
It's just gone.
The data from the 2018-2019 event showed just how brutal this is. It was estimated that over 90% of federal contractor invoices went unpaid for the whole duration.
Over 90%.
90%. It forced thousands of small contractors to miss payroll almost immediately.
That statistic is just staggering. It highlights a fundamental instability. And it's not just the unpaid invoices for work you've already done, is it? It's the work stopping entirely.
Precisely. The agencies issue stop work orders on anything they deem non-essential. So as a business owner, you lose all revenue, but you still have to decide, do I keep my highly skilled staff on without pay, or do I risk losing that talent forever?
An impossible position. And this has to be magnified because huge contracting sources like the Department of Defense and NASA, they immediately halt all non-essential contracts.
Exactly. Future stability just evaporates. But what's really interesting here is that the pain isn't just limited to, people working on missile defense or IT projects.
Right.
The shutdown paralyzes the government's lifeline for capital access. It suspends critical small business loans.
Well, hold on. If banks are sitting on cash, why can't they just issue these loans without the government guarantee for, a few weeks?
That's the nuance people miss. The SBA's flagship programs, the 7A and 504 loan guarantee programs, they stop immediately because the government isn't there to process the guarantee.
And without the guarantee.
Banks are extremely risk-averse on these smaller loans. The federal guarantee shields them from a percentage of the loss, so they just start lending. It's that simple.
So what does that look like in terms of dollars?
During the 2018-2019 event, the SBA stopped processing all new loan applications. And that was estimated to have frozen approximately $2 billion in small business financing per week.
$2 billion a week in expansion, equipment, hiring, just put on ice. Yeah. And I assume if you're a business recovering from, say, a hurricane, those economic injury disaster loans, the EIDLs, those are frozen too.
Absolutely. Then you have the regulatory paralysis. For firms in heavily regulated industries, the shutdown is like an involuntary stop sign. It prevents them from earning revenue, even if they have product ready to go.
Can you give us an example of how that plays out?
Sure. Take the craft beverage industry. It's a huge small business growth area. If you're a small craft brewery and you're waiting for a TTB permit, that's the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, you can't launch your new beer. You can't bottle it, you can't market it, you can't sell it legally.
So you're just stuck.
Completely. The TTB's closure in 2018-2019 delayed new breweries, wineries, and distilleries. They lost crucial launch windows. That's revenue gone forever.
So that's the acute direct damage. But it seems like the shutdown quickly produces this secondary, far-reaching layer of damage, the ripple effect.
We call this the furlough effect, and it's huge. The sudden loss of income for hundreds of thousands of federal employees creates an immediate contraction in consumer demand.
What were the numbers on that?
It was approximately 800,000 federal workers who missed 2 full paychecks during that 35-day shutdown. That translates into billions of dollars in spending power that just vanished from local economies instantly.
And if your business relies on local customers, you feel that immediately. I'm thinking of the restaurants and shops near federal hubs, like in the D.C. area, or businesses that depend on tourists visiting national parks.
Oh, absolutely. Those local businesses reported revenue declines of 50% or more.
50%.
Many had to temporarily close their doors. These are mom-and-pop shops suffering because people who earn money and were expecting to be paid suddenly can't even afford to buy lunch.
And beyond Main Street, the financial markets react badly.
Oh.
That injects a lot of volatility and uncertainty.
It does, and small businesses are the first to feel that squeeze. We saw anecdotal evidence in 2019 that many community banks placed a temporary moratorium on all new small business lending. Just stopped.
So even if you weren't a federal contractor, you couldn't get a loan.
Exactly. And if you're a small, high-growth company, maybe in tech or biotech, trying to raise capital, you're stalled too because the SEC couldn't process many public filings.
Yeah.
It delayed crucial funding.
And then there's the flying blind problem. You're trying to make strategic decisions, but the lights go out on reliable data.
That statistical freeze is so painful for planning. Key economic indicators, things like housing starts, retail sales, GDP components, all that data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Census Bureau gets delayed.
So you're just guessing.
You're guessing. And it's not just the hard data. The support structure disappears. You lose access to free technical assistance from networks like the Small Business Development Centers or the volunteer-based SCORE mentorship program. They lose funding, leaving businesses without guidance when they need it most.
Okay, so we've established the huge financial and economic disruption, but you mentioned something about the human cost. What does that stress actually look like on the ground?
The psychological strain on owners is, well, it's immense. They feel this direct responsibility to their employees, but the revenue has just stopped cold. And it forces them into these high-risk personal finance decisions.
What kind of decisions?
It's distressing. In 2019, we heard stories from small business owners who were dependent on federal contracts. They revealed they had liquidated personal retirement accounts.
Wow.
Or they'd taken out expensive home equity loans, all just to cover their company's payroll.
That's heartbreaking. You're using your own retirement nest egg just to pay your staff during a political dispute you have nothing to do with.
And if that money runs out, you risk a costly brain drain. Your best employees, the ones with security clearances, they leave for stable work. And the reputation damage from not fulfilling contracts, that can outlast the shutdown itself.
So recovery has to be aggressive. Let's talk strategy.
Yep.
First is immediate financial triage, right? Stabilizing the vessel.
That's it. It starts with creating a 90-day cash flow plan. We call it the survival budget. You have to rigorously categorize every single expense as either mission-critical, negotiable, or eliminatable.
And that has to be paired with negotiation, I'd imagine.
Aggressive, proactive negotiation. You have to contact your commercial lenders immediately. Don't wait for them to call you. In 2019, a lot of banks offered temporary relief, but you had to be the one asking for interest-only payments or short-term forbearance.
What if your main bank says no?
Then you explore bridge loan options locally. Look into credit unions and CDFI's community development financial institutions. They're often more focused on supporting the local economy and might have more flexible options.
Okay, so once the government reopens, you can't just flip the switch back on, right? There are steps you have to take.
Critical, meticulous steps. You have to immediately contact your contracting officer, the CO, for a written resumption order. You need that before you restart any work.
Don't assume the light is green.
Never. And this is crucial for your future solvency. You must meticulously document all incurred costs related to the shutdown. That means staff waiting time, idle equipment, storage fees, everything.
And why is that documentation so critical?
Because it's essential for negotiating future claims for what's called termination for convenience costs. It's a legal mechanism that lets you recover some of your expenses when the government stops or pauses a contract. It ensures you're not left holding the bag.
That brings us to the long-term shield. The goal is to never be this vulnerable again. And that has to start with diversifying your client base.
Absolutely. Small businesses have to actively work to cap their federal revenue reliance. Experts suggest aiming for a ceiling of, say, 60 to 70% of your total revenue.
And actively pursue other work.
Yes. Contracts with state and local governments or with the private sector. You need that buffer. And you need a dedicated cash buffer, too.
The emergency fund.
Financial discipline here is paramount. You need to build a shutdown-proof emergency fund. We're talking 3 to 6 months of operational expenses, specifically for payroll and core utilities. You also need operational agility. Cross-train your staff so they can work on internal projects if a stop work order comes through.
Keep them productive, keep them on staff.
Exactly.
So finally, there's advocacy. This feels like a problem that small businesses can't just solve on their own. It requires systemic reform.
It does. They need to advocate for what's known as the wall-off principle. It's basically legislation that grants accepted status to critical, non-political economic functions of the government, building a firewall around them.
And what are the two biggest functions that need to be walled off?
The two biggest are SBA loan guarantee processing and the payment of existing obligated federal contractors. These things have to be shielded from appropriations fights. This is money already committed or critical processes that just shouldn't be used as political leverage.
The 35-day shutdown of 2018-2019 really provided undeniable proof that the small business community bears a disproportionate burden from political gridlock.
It does. These events aren't trivial. They're systemic economic disruptions that just obliterate cash flow and inflict severe stress on owners who risk everything.
So while immediate recovery demands that aggressive financial triage, the long-term solution really lies in diversification and structural preparedness.
And policymakers have to start treating the continuity of SBA lending and contractor payments as a non-negotiable matter of essential economic stability.
It leaves you with a big question, doesn't it? If the small business sector is truly the engine of American job creation, we have to ask, can the U.S. economy survive any future political gridlock if we refuse to insulate the functions that keep that engine running? That's the core question here. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Factoring can meet the cash needs of staffing companies looking to expand. Contact Chris at Versant Funding to learn if your staffing client is a factoring fit.